take a run at this here. I introduce myself, Jameson Winter. I work with the NRCS office here in Redfield as a soil conservationist. Shane Jordan is the DC for the office here. He was originally going to try and do it, but some conflicts came up, so I'm going to be your guy. This PowerPoint presentation I'm going to show you, I will move through relatively quickly. It's kind of a group of us worked on it. There was one that Shane had done and one that actually Jamie Rindles had done from up in Aberdeen, and then there was some stuff that I had done and kind of merged it all together. From an NRCS standpoint, to talk about wildlife habitat and that kind of stuff, you know, one of the programs we spend a lot of time working with that's habitat related is, you know, the CRP side of things. But Sam, our Pheasants Forever biologist, is going to go over that program and some of the side shoots of that. So I'll be looking at some of our other programs. The CSP program, probably a lot of you are familiar with, the EQIP program, Water Bank, and then our Wetland Reserve Easement program that's within our ACEP program. So I'll just start with CSP, which is our conservation program. The basics of the program is it's a year-round sign-up. We have one batching period per year. It usually occurs in late winter or early spring. It's a 5-year contract. It's designed to work for enhancements to your existing operation, and it has some wildlife friendly enhancements within it, but it's not, I wouldn't say that CSP is specifically designed for wildlife, but there are things that you can do within the program to address wildlife concerns. The biggest thing about NRCS or any of these programs is we don't want to look at it from just a program standpoint. Generally, what we try and do, and we try and work with guys, and the route that the agency is continuing to try and go is more of an entire conservation plan approach. So looking at your operation, earlier there was the map that I believe Chris had, looking at, you know, inventorying what it is that you have available to you, your best farm grounds, your best pastures, your wetland areas, your existing habitat, whether it be old shelter belts or cattail wetlands or different things that you have, and then trying to look at your operation as a whole or parts of your operation to identify your best and worst scenarios and try and come up with something that works for your operation financially, for production, as well as for wildlife habitat or environmental concerns, whether it be soil or water or that kind of thing. So that's how I should preface any of these programs, is that any one of these programs might fit into an overall conservation plan, but that's where we really want to start with things, is look at what you have, go from there, and then see if there's a program that maybe helps you, whether it be just technical assistance or financial assistance in implementing those things. Looking at this year's sign up for CSP, it's still open. We've got to the end of the month. The big things on CSP is the payment caps are $40,000 annually with a 5-year contract out to $200,000. That's the cap. Depending on the enhancements we're able to do, depending on the resource concerns on your properties, you know, you may or may not get to that number. That's not really what we're striving for per se, is to max the program out or anything. We're just trying to address your concerns, but oftentimes in doing that we can end up at that cap. There's an existing practice payment, as it says there. So basically, when we inventory your land, we're going to take all the things that you're already doing, consider that, and that generates one part of your score. That part of your score is then what in the end calculates your payment, as well as your ranking score, which determines whether or not you will get funded, because it is a competitive process where everybody gets ranked. Then there's the enhancement practice payments. Basically, that's the things that we have identified that you could do, whether it be for wildlife habitat or soil quality or any of a variety of things, where you then gain an additional score pointage basically to up your score and up your payment there. Basic requirements: you have to be the operator of the land, so it isn't It isn't an owner's type program. If you're the owner and operator, that works for you, but it's designed to be the person who is operating the land, who is going to be making the input decisions as far as fertilizing or how that's going to be harvested, those kind of things. So it's for an operator. You have to have control of the land. That could be, just your deed. It could be a written lease. It could be as simple as the control of land document that we at NRCS have that you can take out to your landowners and go over the program with them and have them sign off on. That control of land document doesn't guarantee you control of the land for 5 years. It doesn't force the landowner into saying they're going to rent to you for the next 5 years. It's just basically a way of documenting that discussion has been had between you and the landowner, saying that, yeah, for the foreseeable future, for the life of this contract, you should be the renter. If something happens, you need to notify us so we can modify your contract accordingly so you don't end up in violation. I have to get that out there. You have to be USDA compliant. All of these programs that I'm going to go through, you have to have on file 1026. You have to meet AGI requirements. Basically, you have to be Farm Bill compliant. We're going to have you, for CSP, define your crop rotations and your whole ag operation, because that gives us that baseline that I mentioned. And then we'll have you give us, the FSA maps of the fields you're looking to put in and describe kind of what your crop rotations are, what you're looking to do, what you might be interested in, any areas of concern you might have as kind of a cursory look before we go on site. So that's kind of the basics of what the program is, and then some enhancements. I've got a few listed here. The common enhancements, Arrow 4 and Arrow 7, are tied to drift reduction nozzles or GPS targeted spray applications. Planto 2 is a common pasture enhancement that we use. It's pasture monitoring, basically looking at turn in and take out dates, residual grass after grazing, basically trying to get a better feel of how your grazing operation is impacting your lands and what kind of wildlife habitat you might be leaving, or what kind of compaction issues you might be causing, or what kind of potential species manipulation you may be having on your lands, because the reality is the way you graze your land, the rotations that you use can ultimately impact the species composition in your pastures. Now, some of them are primarily brome bluegrass, and it's really difficult to move those any one direction. Brome just is there and just keeps coming or whatever. But in some instances where you have a mostly native situation, you can take it towards a more cool season non-native depending on your grazing, or you can promote your native warm seasons if you're looking for a different timing of use. You can do that through grazing, and Plant 02 is designed to help you kind of look at how your pasture may be changing over time based on your management. Soil quality 4 and 5, that SQLO 4 and 5, those are cover crop related. Water quality 4 is a tissue sampling that we do on corn, basically looking at nitrogen levels within the plant, looking at and we also have soil samples associated with that, basically looking at how those two are working together, if you're overshooting or undershooting based on your current applications. And then we usually try and have that be in season, so you have the opportunity to apply or whatever if you want to, if you feel that you're running low or short. Water quality 11, that is a targeted a zoned precision application of nutrients, basically. So that's where you have your field zone for soil types, and then trying to basically maximize your productivity while minimizing your inputs based on your field. Water quality 3 is an enhancement that we use for rotation of like creep feeders or mineral blocks or things like that, basically trying to distribute grazing pressure within your pasture, and also try and avoid some of those kind of dead areas, basically, where if you constantly go there, it kills that area. Water quality 29 is our IPM enhancement. It's basically it's field scouting and a bunch of things that we look at for your chemical applications, just to overall get a picture of your overall pest management and help you make decisions on maybe changing up the chemicals that you're using, or look more closely at thresholds for deciding to use a chemical, basically. And then water quality 33 is tied to frost kill or non-chemical kill on cover crops. Newer enhancements he's got in there is the animal 34. That's tied to food plots for wildlife. basically it's leaving standing grain crops. It's on a half acre per 40 acre basis. So basically on a 160 you'd have 2 acres or whatever there that you would leave standing. Generally it's supposed to be in half to 1 acre blocks or whatever. There's a little bit of wiggle room in there on that, but it's supposed to be per field based basically. It's not super common on our bigger operations because it can be a lot of acres of a high commodity, crop out there. So we don't see it used except for on some smaller operations or some operations that are, hunting outfits as well that, it makes economical sense for them to have those places as well. Plan 06 is tied to shelter belt renovations, which can be applied from a wildlife standpoint. Basically something that's dead, down, and dying and isn't really offering much protection. We can go in and clean things up, put some new rows in, add additional rows. There's some stuff that we can do in there. And then soil quality 15 isn't really wildlife related. It's a new soil test, the Haney test that they're using. But so those are the enhancements. Not super wildlife related, most of them except for animal 34. Some of the grazing stuff, leaving some residual that is going to be better for wildlife out there, but that's the common enhancements within CSP. I pulled off some of the far less common anyway. We don't use them a lot, mostly just because there hasn't been a lot of interest. They're a little bit more difficult to implement, but they are out there. They're things that you can do, and we would like to work with anybody that's interested in it. The animal 03, so that's basically in grazing lands where you would introduce, it would be interseeding or kind of reseeding areas of pastured lands or whatever, trying to incorporate more native grasses and legumes, better for wildlife overall. And that's on a 15% by dry matter basis. So, there's some seeding sheets and things we'd have to work with you on to do that. Animal 9, that's a grazing management for wildlife. So basically what that means is you're going to have identified rest pastures in your rotation that as each year for the next 5 years you'll move that rest piece around, and basically it's season-long rest. So you have to have access to quite a bit of grass. It's a commitment to wildlife basically that you're going to leave areas stand for for that full growing season. It's not, again, not something we use a lot, but it is there. Prairie restoration for grazing and wildlife habitat is, basically exactly what it says. It's basically planting a native mix that you could graze, but there are some restrictions on grazing time and different things to encourage wildlife habitat. Animal 32 and Animal 40, those we actually do use semi-frequently. Extending filter strips, buffer strips, or field borders, basically. Those are looking at maybe you have a draw that runs through your land, or maybe you have a wetland that you kind of have a little buffer around or something. You would extend those 60 feet. It's at your cost to seed the grass and everything down, but it's an enhancement that gets you some points within the program, may help reach that cap if that's something you're trying to get to. And overall, it's going to provide wildlife benefits. So that's one of the things that you can do by expanding those grassland areas around those wetlands and or field borders off of ditches and things like that. And then the Animal 41 is a multi-species perennial biomass planting. So basically it's a hayland planting that with management that you would leave some areas, but you would be able to have a diverse mix of natives and or perennials to encourage brood habitat, in this area specifically, but having some haying management stuff on that as well. And one I forgot to put in there is there's a patch burn grazing one that we can do through CSP, basically using grazing and prescribed fire to manage your grasslands for species diversity and wildlife habitat. So that's some things there. And then I believe there's a pollinator one that I forgot to grab as well, where you can basically plant blocks of pollinator habitat, lots of forb diversity. That's CSP. Like I said, it's not a wildlife program as a whole, because there's not a lot of points associated in the ranking system with a lot of these different enhancements. These are things that if you're interested in, CSP is going to work out, in the planning process for you anyway. These are some additional things that you might consider doing, if you're really interested in getting some wildlife benefits on your property or improving your score. The EQIP program is more wildlife based. It now is basically, we used to have the WIP program, which is our Wildlife Habitat Incentives program. that basically, those funds kind of got married to EQIP now. So there's some wildlife practices that we can do through EQIP. But our EQIP program is very similar to things that Al had mentioned, or that Brian had mentioned, where we're looking at water development, we're looking at fencing, we're looking at prescribed grazing rotations, things like that. Again, the sign up is year round. You can come in and give us an application any time of the year. We'll put you in the next available batching period. Basically, it happens once a year. Usually it's in late fall or early winter. That period has closed for this go-around. We're getting close actually to funding the contracts that were identified this year. Generally 3-year contracts. There's a little wiggle room there for management. Some of them go out to 5 years. Some of them are maybe only 2 years. There's a little bit of wiggle room in there. Like I say, allow for grazing management, grass plantings, some shelter belts, water development, cover cropping, and a lot of other things. It's, again, not specifically wildlife habitat driven, but there are a lot of things that you can do through EQIP that have wildlife benefits, and there are some wildlife practices that we can do through the program. As I mentioned, cover crops are common in EQIP, where we have guys add small grains to their rotations and then follow them with a cover crop. We've done some season-long cover cropping things. We've got some guys that are planting oats for forage. Basically, they're cutting it off and then they're going in with an earlier cover crop. And then potentially even grazing that cover crop off if they get a good enough stand. So there's some things we're doing there, but all of those things are allowing some wildlife habitat, and bringing small grains back onto the landscape has a lot of value for our upland birds, well, especially, and our ducks. If we go into like a winter wheat, like if you plant a winter wheat deal that goes over to the next spring and then you harvest, there's a lot of research been done about the use of winter wheat by nesting birds, and it's actually it's not bad. If you can't have big blocks of CRP or grassland, diverse grassland, winter wheat isn't a bad option for getting some nesting. So it's one thing that fits into some rotations and we can use. Pasture improvements, cross fencing, rural water development, that kind of stuff. As was mentioned earlier, a lot of the reasons that we're interested in that as an agency are tied to water quality, getting cattle out of stream banks, fencing those out, or different things, repairing areas, wetlands maybe, so they're not getting mudded up or wrecked. And then grazed grass is better than bare soil for wildlife. So there's a wildlife benefit to our agency and everybody for wildlife if we're keeping pasture on the landscape and that kind of thing. Cross fencing being, one of the more wildlife friendly things that we can do through EQIP, because we can get a rotational grazing system set up that basically has seasons of use through that grazing system that allows nesting in certain areas, and we can have a little bit better residual usually in a rotational system than we can in a continuous graze system. So trying to get some of that done. Hayland plantings, pasture and range plantings, that's getting grass on the landscape. And then pollinator plantings, again, those are things that you can do, encouraging for monarchs or honeybees or anything like that. Shelter belts, we can plant new shelter belts. Generally they're going to be for field protection or livestock protection through the EQIP program, or do some renovations, but again, some wildlife benefits there. And the other ones are nutrient management, integrated pest management, just things that we can do that I mentioned in CSP. Sometimes we do those things through EQIP instead of CSP. Just depends on each landowner's situation. Maybe he's got a CSP application and he wants to do something else, and it's tied to EQIP, and he decided after he's already got a CSP that he'd like to focus more on his nutrient management on a different piece or something like that. Then we'll tag it on to an EQIP or something like that. I'm going to throw this in there quick just so that people here know about it. It's not really wildlife related, but we do have some funds available to do like bedpack barns, that kind of thing. 2 years in advance basically is what we're recommending on these deals anymore, because there's a lot of planning that goes on. You have to get building designs, you have to get zoning stuff figured out, you have to get on-site stuff figuring out what we're going to do with manure management or waste, if we're going to do lagoons, or if we're going to do like grassed waterways or vegetated treatment areas or different things. So there's a lot of things that go into that. So it's about 2 years out It says our design's less than 1,000 AUMs. That's, if it's bigger than that, we're not touching it anyway. So that's basically where we're at on that. The only, real wildlife benefits to us taking this on is if you have, feedlots that are draining due to the shape of the land or whatever, run off into wetlands, and you're getting, eutrophication of those wetlands, or if you're getting water quality issues for fish or whatever in a slough adjacent to your property, we can address water quality and things like that through these buildings, and in turn have some wildlife benefit, but it's not directly targeted towards that. But I figured while I was here and I had a captive audience, I might as well mention some of the things we can do. So to mention, we do have some specific initiatives within EQIP, so these are a little bit more tied to wildlife. The honeybee program, technically wildlife, but also, again, gaining a lot of brood rearing benefits and stuff like that out of those types of programs, really heavily focusing on hayland plantings, perennial forbs, we'll do alfalfa and stuff with management on cuttings and things like that through the honeybee program as well. So, we can help you plant alfalfa if you want to through some of these programs. And then the prairie pothole wetland and grassland retention program is really tied at trying to manage grassland via grazing, or plant additional grazing acres, get grass on the landscape, and or buffer wetlands and things like that. So it's using some of the practices I already mentioned, just it's a separate fund pool, a different allocation of resources basically to consider some of those things. So there's special emphasis. There's sage grouse initiative out west, that's a wildlife thing tied to our EQIP program, but not applicable here really. Water bank I'm going to mention really quick. Year-round sign-up. Batching occurs once annually, usually in the wintertime or early spring. I say it doesn't have consistent funding there. Main reason I say that, as of 3 weeks ago, we weren't going to have water bank. As of 2 weeks ago, we're going to have water bank. So right now there is an active water bank sign-up. It will go till the 11th of March. We take old applications that we have. We contact the guys, see if they're still interested. The basics on water bank. It's a 10-year deal. It's kind of like our easement program meets CRP kind of mix. You have the ability to take cropped acres with wetlands, plant a buffer around them, get payment on those acres that are flooded as well as the buffer that you plant. The only kicker there is it's not cost shared to get the buffer planted. Basically, you're at your own expense to plant a decent grass mix around these wetland areas or whatever. But then a lot of times wetlands that you haven't been able to farm in a very, very long time. It doesn't have to meet cropping history the same way CRP does. So if it's been cropped ever, it goes at the cropped rate. And then there's a pasture rate for wetlands. It's looking at all wetlands basically. So when it says a water bank program, that's exactly what it is aimed to do. It's looking at all forms of wetlands that aren't protected and trying to protect those areas with some kind of grass or pasture management sometimes, or fencing out pasture around wetlands to protect those areas. $50 an acre for cropland, $35 an acre for non-crop, so pasture areas. Like I say, no cost share for the seeding or habitat establishment or any fencing out that you would do in pasture situations. But there are some areas that aren't producing for you. They don't meet CRP requirements. A long-term 30-year or perpetual easement isn't your cup of tea. Water bank is something that you can look into. It's very competitive because there's a lot of land that falls into that category, and we get a lot of applications for it, and the fund pool is not that big because it's pretty inconsistent funding. But if it's something you're interested in, come in, talk with us, and we will do the best we can to maximize your score and try and get you a crack at it. WRE, not something we have a lot of in Spink County. This is probably our most wildlife friendly thing that we as an agency have outside of CRP. However, it is a much longer commitment on your behalf. But this is the part of the slideshow or whatever that Jamie from up in Aberdeen mostly did, but I'm going to give you the rundown briefly. There's some eligibility requirements. You have to have owned the land for at least 2 years, and you have to provide evidence of ownership. Basically, you have to have a deed that's in your name. what makes the land eligible? Has to have wetlands that can be restored. It's farmed or prior converted. It can be wetlands that are cropped under natural conditions. It can be restored wetlands that you restored during CRP. The CRP contract is up and now you're like, well, maybe I want to put it into an easement. You can do that. Riparian areas along river bottoms, and then it gives a little bit there about for every acre of wetland we can take up to 9 additional acres of upland, non-cropped or non-altered areas. So that's the eligibility overall. Basically, it's looking at taking non-productive areas out of your operation and setting them aside for wildlife, for water improvement, for overall soil health improvement if you've got some areas that are starting to salt out on you and different things like that. So WRE is used there. Continuous applications, again, just like our other programs, there's a ranking period once a year. It's already passed for this go around. We look at the wetlands that you have available, the total wetland to upland ratio, protected easements that you're next to, any T&E species present. There's a lot of factors that go into weighting your easement score. As you can see there, we receive a pretty good pot of money, $7 million, but $7 million doesn't go super far when you're buying bigger parcels of land basically at a pretty competitive land value for an easement. So it's not easy to get funded through this program, but we fund several a year. Mostly in other counties just because we haven't had a lot of instances that work really well for WRE in Spink County, but if you think you have one, we'd be more than willing to work with you on it. If you're accepted, basically, then there's a long process of basically purchasing the easement from you. You can crop it during the time while we're procuring the easement or whatever. There's going to be a survey involved. There's going to be staking, title search, all that kind of stuff. And then we close the easement. When the easement is closed, you're going to receive a payment. It's in one lump sum, basically, and we'll get into some of that stuff here pretty quick. You're going to lose those base acres once it's pulled out. This is what WRE means to you from a working lands perspective. Basically, once it's WRE, it's not, in a traditional WRE, it's not a working lands really anymore. It's going to be a set aside that you still own the land with the easement. Taxes, things like that are still yours. Control of access is yours. To clarify, there is no public hunting tied to this or whatever. It's your choice to let anybody access it. It all remains that way. You retain any liability. You can use it for hunting, fishing. Quiet enjoyment is written right into the contract. So if you want to bird watch or whatever, that is yours to do. Any weed control, that's to you. The easement restrictions, not harvesting any crops on it. You're not going to be haying it, mowing it, or doing any seed harvesting. No grazing as a general rule unless deemed necessary for habitat management by NRCS in cooperation with you. Very uncommon that that's going to happen, and it'll be on a very case-by-case, very limited basis. No dumping. You can't have a dump for old machinery or rock piles or things like that that start showing up there. You're not going to be altering it. You're not going to be out there disturbing it, with any haying or grazing practices or anything like that during nesting and things like that. And no permanent buildings or structures. And I guess that's even been taken so far as, like if you put a deer blind out there, that's cool, unless it's like cemented into the ground. Then that's not cool. So that's basically how, if it's cemented, they consider it permanent, and then you have a problem. So that's what you need to be aware of before you go into it. Now the payments are based on this GARC deal here. It's a per acre deal. 2015 rates for Spink County is what I have to go off, because the 2016 rates I don't have yet. There's what they are. Cropland, $31.46 an acre. Non-cropped, $14.72 an acre. Payment at a lump sum again. Now, that's the full GARC rate. And when we get to the next slide, I believe it is right there. It's going to go over what that then means. If you do a perpetual easement, that means forever an easement, basically. It will forever and ever be wildlife habitat and a protected wetland. NRCS is going to pay you 100% of that easement acquisition, and we're going to pay 100% of the restoration costs. So all grass seeding, all drills, all habitat, or all land prep, you name it, NRCS is covering that at their rate. Then on top of that, you're going to get that full GEARC value. That's the payment per acre that you're going to receive for selling the easement. And closing costs, I mean, all of that is tied into that. Basically, NRCS is going to try and cover everything associated with making that easement happen. There's the 30-year easement option. That's definitely more common than our perpetual easement because people just, you know, it's hard to say that forever it's going to just be this. So 30-year easement we see pretty commonly. 75% of that GARC is your payment then. 75% of the restoration costs, and they're still going to do the closing costs and everything else on procuring that easement for that time frame. So that's how that works. New in the Farm Bill, there is an option to do some reserved grazing rights and things. Again, the numbers are right there. 75% on the 30-year easement for restoration costs, 100% on the perpetual, but you're going to get some grazing rights. Now, it says right there, there's going to be a grazing management plan associated with that, and your payment rates are going to be reduced by 25%. That's basically a new thing to the most recent Farm Bill. I have not worked with one personally, so that would be something, if you were interested and thought it might work for you, that we would work together up in the office and come up with the answers if I don't have them, you know, right now. That being said, my understanding is that we, as an agency working with you, would set up a rotational grazing system, etc., that's going to be best for the grass that's going to be seeded out there, best for wildlife, and still give you some grazing value to that land. So that's just an option that exists out there. A little bit about the restoration process. Basically, if it's been a drained wetland, if it's been ditched, if it's been tiled, any of those things are available to WRE, and in fact score several points for basically being converted back. So when it's a lost wetland, trying to get it back is something that we are really interested in. We'll plug ditches, we'll have tile broke, we'll do different things to recover these wetlands, working with you, and those costs are part of that restoration that's covered at 75 or 100%, as was mentioned. Guaranteed, if you're doing a WRE, it's going to be a diverse stand, kind of like Matt had mentioned. If NRCS is footing the bill, and this is for wildlife and protection of those lands, it's going to be diverse. It's going to be a 15, 20, 25 species mix involving all of the different native grasses and forbs that are relatively financially feasible and likely to grow in those soil conditions that your site exists at. And we may even do pollinator blocks if it's something that you're willing to do or something you want to do. A lot of times we see those pollinator blocks developed because they're really good at holding pheasants, and so people will do that in their WRE because they can still hunt it, so they'll put it in an area where basically they're going to attract birds late in the season, and so that's where most guys end up doing it, but it's in there. It's something we can do for several reasons. Outside of that, I probably went way longer than I meant to. Any questions you have right now, I'm more than happy to take a whack at them. Any questions you have, if you think of them later, I've got a handful of my cards back there. And as I mentioned, our DC Shane is up there as well, so any one of us you could talk to. I have a handful of pamphlets kind of outlining the conservation planning process that NRCS is trying to use, doing farm-wide planning. Those are the trifolds. And then I have a handful of handouts for the ASEP WRE program for CSP and EQIP. I didn't bring a ton of them. We have gobs and gobs of them up at the office, though, if you want to stop up. So with that, any questions, fire away. Otherwise, I'll turn it over.
I might just make one little plug here, and I don't want to take up too much time, but Matt and I get asked a lot if game fish and parks can use our programs to pick up the portion of the cost share that NRCS program doesn't fund. So, for example, the water bank program. Mm-hmm. The cost of establishing the grasses falls on you guys as the landowner. We typically don't pick up those extra funds. However, if you guys are willing to sign up a portion of your property into our walk-in program, we might pick up some of those funds for you guys. So that's kind of our trade-off there, is that if you guys are willing to allow some public access, we can help further cost share some of those programs for you guys. So we don't really advertise that just because most of the guys that are in our walk-in program want to be in our walk-in program already. Mm-hmm. But there is that opportunity there for us to help out.
How long be in the water programs?
For the life of your contract. So if the water bank program is a 10-year agreement, then we would be looking for a 10-year agreement on those water agreements.
I should, he mentioned a good point there. You know, partnerships is something that the NRCS tries to work with, you know, as much as we can. We partner with Pheasants Forever. They've got some programs I'm sure Sam's going to cover here that we try and do. Planning associated with those programs. We have partnered with Fish and Wildlife Service. We've partnered with GF&P on different projects. We've had some, EQIP is one of those projects where a lot of times we end up partnering. We'll do some of the grass seeding sometimes. Fish and Wildlife Service might pony up some money, or even GF&P has on some of ours, where then we work on water development and fencing and different things, but they'll put some money in for the grass seeding. We've had some of those kind of things come together. So there's a lot of different ways to tie all of our agencies together, and mostly it all just starts with that conservation planning, where you come in and talk with us, that wildlife planning, where any one of our offices is going to reach out to whomever they can to try and make the best situation for you.